Imagine waking up every morning with a knot in your stomach, dreading the moment you step through the doors of your office, knowing that the air will be thick with the suffocating presence of your boss, someone who demands attention, adoration, and absolute loyalty at every turn, someone for whom even the tiniest deviation from their carefully constructed narrative is met with icy disdain or full-blown rage. This is not just micromanagement, nor is it simple incompetence. The signs begin small, but accumulate with a toxic heaviness. Perhaps it's in the way they never give credit where credit is due, how every team victory is spun and twisted until they emerge as the sole architect of success, and every failure is weaponized to shame, blame, and isolate you or your colleagues, often laced with sarcasm, cutting remarks, or outright humiliation in front of your peers, leaving you questioning your own worth and desperately trying to anticipate their next unpredictable mood swing. Narcissistic bosses exude a predatory kind of charisma at first, drawing people in with grand visions or magnetic confidence, but that early charm quickly morphs into a relentless need for flattery, an inability to tolerate criticism of any kind, even when couched as helpful feedback, and a chilling lack of empathy that leaves you and your workmates feeling like disposable props in the ongoing spectacle of their self-importance, where your feelings and needs are not just invisible but irrelevant. The warning signs are everywhere, though it can take months or even years for their full pattern to emerge. The constant self-promotion, paired with suspicion or sabotage of others' achievements. The sweeping promises that are often broken without explanation, or blamed on the incompetence of others. The ever-shifting goalposts, causing you to work around the clock to satisfy shifting and impossible standards. The pathological need to be seen as right, even when obviously wrong. The inability to admit faults or apologize with sincerity. And the readiness to rewrite reality if it means protecting their fragile ego. Even if that means lying outright or rewriting workplace history in front of everyone. There is also the insidious psychological warfare. One day, you're the favorite, singled out for praise, and given responsibilities that make you feel special, indispensable. But the next, you are cast out, ignored, or emotionally punished for some imaginary slight, or simply for failing to perform psychic labor. You may notice their selective amnesia about policies and promises, their tendency to triangulate and set employees against each other, their voracious need to eavesdrop, monitor, or demand detailed reports, not out of oversight, but so every scrap of information is ammunition they can use. 7. Spend immense energy second-guessing yourself, agonizing over emails, rehearsing conversations in your mind, constantly feeling you are one wrong word away from provoking their wrath. This is not ordinary stress. It sinks into your bones, slowly sapping your enthusiasm, eroding your self-esteem, and making you doubt your very sanity. Because narcissistic bosses are master manipulators, experts at gaslighting, making you doubt what you saw, heard, or experienced, warping your memories until you find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, or trying to fix problems that don't exist, except in their paranoid imagination. They will often seek out scapegoats, using every formal HR process and informal rumor mill to smear those who dare question their authority, or worse, outperform them. They might even co-opt your work, publish your ideas as theirs, and take visible pleasure in watching you squirm as your contributions are erased, your reputation tarnished, your courage extinguished. The most brutal truth is that most organizations, whether through ignorance, willful blindness, or complicity, allow this kind of behavior to flourish because narcissists are often brilliant at managing up, dazzling their own supervisors or the board with carefully staged charisma, while their abuses rain down on those below. If you try to speak up, you may be gently discouraged or subtly threatened to get with the program, and if you do escalate, you may face retaliation ranging from subtleties sidelining to open hostility. as these bosses are hypersensitive to even the mildest perceived threat to their control. Yet the cost of staying silent is enormous. A culture of fear, climbing turnover rates as talent flees or burns out, and for those who remain, a slow, agonizing erosion of morale, innovation, and hope. You'll hear the rationalizations from colleagues, HR, or even yourself. Maybe they're just passionate. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe the pressure is getting to all of us. But deep down, the pain is unmistakable. The daily walking on eggshells, the isolation as team bonds break under the stress, the way your weekends are spent recovering from psychological bruises or working frantically to fix things that are never your fault in the first place. Psychologically, if you look at the clinical markers of narcissistic personality disorder, you'll see box after box checked. Grandiosity, an insatiable need for admiration, lack of empathy, exploitative relationships, arrogance, envy, hypersensitivity to criticism, chronic sense of entitlement, manipulativeness, and perhaps most disturbing of all, a seeming inability to recognize or care about the harm they cause. These are not merely quirks or flaws, but deep-seated traits that make the narcissistic boss an existential threat to any healthy workplace. And the heartbreak is that all judgment, right, wrong, fair, unfair, becomes blurred by the emotional scars and confusion they leave behind. You may find yourself blaming yourself, justifying their behavior, or losing your faith in all management structures, when the reality is that what you are experiencing is a deeply dysfunctional pattern that is extremely well documented by organizational psychologists and whistleblowers alike. The unbiased truth is that surviving under a narcissistic boss means either sacrificing your own integrity and mental health to avoid retaliation, attempting to build coalitions to expose the abuse with enormous risk and uncertain outcomes, or, most often, making the difficult decision to escape entirely for the sake of your well-being. Yet, it's important as well to recognize how easy it is, in a toxic environment, to misinterpret legitimate authority or firm leadership as narcissism, and how sometimes our own insecurities or misunderstandings can color our perception. A real, non-narcissistic leader can sometimes be demanding or distant without being pathologically self-absorbed. So while it's critical to acknowledge the pain and trauma narcissistic bosses inflict, the journey to clarity also means interrogating our own biases and double-checking the evidence before making a final judgment. Nevertheless, if you find that nearly every interaction is colored by manipulation, cruelty, gaslighting, and a chronic thirst for recognition at your expense, then the brutal, crystal clear truth is that you likely are working for a narcissist, and the consequences, left unchecked, are not merely professional setbacks, but deep psychological wounds that can last for years, demanding immense courage and support to unlearn the self-blame, rebuild your sense of agency, and finally, reclaim your right to a healthy, respectful, and genuinely collaborative work environment, because you deserve better. And sometimes, the harshest lesson to accept is simply that it wasn't your fault. It was never about you, but about someone else's endless, hollow hunger for validation and power. A hunger that, until broken, will consume not just individuals, but the very soul of a workplace.